Hello, my name is Russell Denver. I'm your new town moderator, and I was elected at the April 12th, 2016 town election. It is my pleasure to be able to moderate what could be the last annual town meeting in the history of East Long Meadow. The meeting will take place on Monday, May 16th, 2016 at 7 p.m. at the high school auditorium at East Long Meadow High School. Most everyone should have received a copy of the annual town meeting warrant as it was delivered in the reminder publication this past Thursday. Please take an opportunity to review the warrant and all the exhibits prior to coming to annual town meeting. As being the last town meeting, I fully expect a very good turnout of people to participate in this form of democracy before we begin our new form of government under the new town charter to take effect July 1st, 2016. So here to discuss Article 2 is Eric Madison, who is chair of the Appropriations Committee. And the Appropriations Committee is tasked with presenting to town meeting their recommendation for the next fiscal year budget. Eric?
Evening, Mr. Moderator. Thank you for having me in.
Go.
So a couple things that were of concern, or the main thing of concern really of the Appropriations Committee, not unlike last year, is the ever-increasing tax rate. With the property values remaining relatively flat, any budget increases are absorbed solely by the tax rate. Mm-hmm. Under the constraints of Proposition 2.5, we can't raise revenue beyond $25 per thousand. They cap it at that. So we've been worried that our tax rate, at the rate that it's been climbing, based on our forecast in another 4 or 5 years, we would exceed that $25 per thousand cap. So just like last year, this year we're actually we're recommending a budget that is quite conservative and minimizes any increases to help keep that tax rate down and low. This chart here illustrates the tax rate over the last 10 years, and you can notice since 2008, when the real estate market suffered the damages that it did, our tax rate's been climbing ever since. The current tax rate the tax rate being proposed for 2017 will be $21.68. So that's represented by the darker bar. The meat of the budget, on the revenue side, we are recommending raising and appropriating $39,285,346 by real estate and personal property taxes. Again, that does not represent the full amount allowed under Proposition 2.5. We're using a local receipt number of $3,420,400. Local receipts are monies brought in by meals tax and by various permits and fees that are paid in the town. Our state aid, the numbers we're using really are what the governor's budget represented when he submitted it back in February. As we know, as we're taping this, the state still has not decided on a budget. In fact, I don't believe it's even come out of the House yet. So it might be some time before the state actually fixes a budget.
So Eric, could I just interrupt you and ask you a question? You indicated that you're recommending the town not raise the maximum amounts of real estate.
That's correct.
Taxes. Could you explain that to the public, please?
Sure. Actually, it's all explained further at the end of the program. Okay. Maybe we'll answer it then. If not, I'll go back to it. We have some reimbursement still from the state for Birchland Park School of $668,000, and then there's a few miscellaneous transfers that come into the general fund of $257,525 for a total revenue of $55,184,827. On the uses side, we're recommending under administration and finance $2,307,000, insurance taxes in the reserve fund $1,223,000. Debt services, which pays off any money the town has borrowed over the years, $2,771,000. Education, as indicated, is $28,561,000. The Public Works, which also includes the utilities, the cost of our, to heat all of our town buildings and the electricity we use in town, of $3,927,000, and Public Safety, $3,766,000. Continuing, Health and Human Services, $1,461,000. Library and Recreation, $838,000. Planning, Zoning, and Conservation, $148,000. Employee Benefits, which is the one item that we have the least control over, and is second only to the education budget in town, $7,903,000. Capital improvements and other warrant articles that appear that carry the recommendation of the Appropriations Committee, $1,324,000. And then the Community Preservation, state charges and an abatement fund of $950,000 for total uses of $55,184,827. That represents a 1.71% increase over last year, which is quite minimal. So we're pretty proud to be able to bring that forward. I want to touch a little bit on what this budget does. It enhances the fire protection by increasing the hours of full-time coverage. This is the phase 2 of a 2-year project that we started last year by increasing the full-time coverage of firefighters. It funds a human resources department, something the Appropriations Committee has felt strong we're really lacking in town, at 1.5 full-time equivalents. It funds 1 new school position. It still maintains a healthy level of reserves, currently at 7.28%. The reserves being our stabilization fund and our free cash.
Right.
It uses no free cash to balance the annual costs, so we're not using any money in savings to balance our budget. And it contributes to the town's other post-employment benefits liabilities. What the proposed budget doesn't do, and this I think goes to your question earlier, this doesn't use the full levy capacity, leaving over $1,160,000 in unused levy capacity. That is, under Prop 2.5, we're allowed to raise so much money under the constraints of Prop 2.5 of what's called from the levy, from the total amount of taxation in town. We're using approximately 50% of that this year. So our tax rate will only go up by half of what, under the law, it's allowed to go up. The potential tax rate, if we were to raise the taxes to the full amount allowed by law, would climb to $22.25, getting ever so closer to that $25 per thousand cap. That would represent an increase of $1.13 per thousand for each household. The tax rate that we're proposing under this budget would be $21.68, or 56 cents per 1,000.
Great. It's wonderful. That's good news.
Yeah, it is. We're pretty proud that we're able to actually grow this, grow the services of the town and still maintain a slight growth to
So
the
I'd like
budget.
to have you answer a couple of questions. So
Sure.
one is the new Human Resource Department. Could you address that a little bit more and why the Appropriations Committee felt that that was needed? And then the second one is there is a warrant article with respect to compensated absences, which is a new expenditure this year. So if you could address those two issues.
Sure. So the Human Resources Department is something the Appropriations Committee has been working on for a couple of years now in concert with the Board of Selectmen. Basically, we think of ourselves as a $55 million not-for-profit enterprise, service industry type enterprise, and we have no Human Resources Department. That has created a tremendous amount of issues. We believe it's created a tremendous amount of additional costs in the town that come through by way of labor management issues, which eventually turn into legal issues and cost us in legal fees and sometimes penalties. Along with that, we know that in many cases we're not meeting our obligations in terms of regulations that we have to meet with our employees because we don't have anybody to administer them. So those are probably the two biggest driving factors behind getting a Human Resources Department.
Great.
It represents about $150,000 increase to the budget. but we actually believe that in the long run, it will save the town money.
Great.
And the other one was
The compensated absences fund?
yeah, we've had an issue over the years in town where if somebody is to retire from a position in any department in town and is under the contractual agreements is eligible for pay for unused leave, then that department takes a significant hit when they leave by having to pay all those unpaid absences, which was not something they budgeted for if the retirement was not, or the person leaving was not anticipated. Under Mass General Law, by accepting a certain provision of Mass General Law, which we did at the Fall Town Meeting in 2015, it allows us to establish a fund. In the accounting office calculates a liability, a potential liability based upon the time that's out there, and we can contribute to this fund throughout the years until we meet that obligation. Then when a person leaves, that the money owed to them would come out of that fund and not the individual budget, thereby not creating a financial crisis for that department.
Great. So, under the new charter, what becomes of the Appropriations Committee?
The Appropriations Committee ceases to exist under the charter, although there are provisions in the charter that allow the town manager to appoint a committee if he so desires the assistance of such a committee, but there is no committee under the charter.
So the role and responsibility of developing the town budget and getting it passed falls on whom?
The town manager.
Okay.
It'll be the town manager's responsibility to working with the various departments, for example, working with the school department as well as all the other departments, to compile a budget, bring that forward to the council for consideration. The council will hold a minimum of one public hearing on that budget, so that the people have a voice in the process. And then they must pass a budget by June 1st each year.
Great. So Eric, thank you, and thank to the members of the Appropriations Committee who have just done outstanding work over the years. Thank you.
Thank you.
So joining me this evening to talk about the fiscal year 2017 school budget is Gordon Smith, School Superintendent, and Bill Fonseca, Chairman of the School Committee. Gentlemen?
Well, thank you, first of all, Russ, for having us in, and we're going to give a brief summary of next year's budget. As you know, we've worked closely with Appropriations since December to develop what we feel is a responsible budget, staying within the guidelines given to all departments for fiscal year 2016-17. This budget highlights two priorities that Superintendent Smith will now briefly speak about.
Thank you, Mr. Fonseca, and thank you, Mr. Denver, for inviting us in. As Mr. Fonseca said, our budget request is a request for an increase of approximately 2% on our current school year budget. And as we put together that request, we basically were looking to emphasize and focus in on two priorities, one of which looks at successful programming that we feel has supported students and allowed them to continue to grow and make good progress through their studies, not only this year, but in previous years. It allows us to move all those programs and supports and personnel forward. And then the second one, which we really feel over the last 5 years has contributed to some pretty incredible success by all of our students, is finalizing or completing an academic coaching model. And basically what that is a model where we look to put in place a content area specialist. In most cases, it's either an English language arts specialist or a math specialist. And we look to have grades K through 8 covered, where we're supporting students, teachers, and working with administrators to put together flexible instructional plans that bring into our classrooms the best instructional practices and strategies to help our students grow. And when you put in place these specialists, as I said, literacy and math, they have a chance to not only learn the culture of the schools and of the East Long Meadow Public School District as a whole, but they have a chance to help us change what we're doing based on student achievement data, within the school year and provide professional development that's connected to our goals and our students. And so this budget request allows us to finish that model and really support with academic coaching K through 8.
And what is the overall dollar amount increase of the budget?
That's a great question, and I have it right here. So the overall dollar amount, with a 2% increase, brings us to a budget of $28,557,076.
Great. Okay. Do you foresee any new initiatives over the next couple of years coming forward?
I think completing the academic coaching model, which was something we started 5 years ago, was something that we were hoping to sustain, and appropriations has really helped us do that. Just gradually each year putting those positions in place. I think as we continue to look at our achievement data, we'll identify areas where we may need to tweak, but very costly initiatives at the moment, we're not seeing that. We're thinking that the programs and the people we have in place are helping our district move forward.
Great. So anything else you'd like to add?
No, I mean, we appreciate the effort that appropriations put forward to help us achieve this budget. I mean, we worked very well together, as we have in the past years, and we've never lost focus of the kids being at the center, and that's what it's all about.
So one thing I'm going to talk a little bit during this discussion is the new charter and how it might impact the different departments.
Sure.
So would you care to just discuss whether there will be any changes to the functioning of the school department or the school committee?
In the new charter, you will notice no changes to the makeup of the school committee or the function of the school committee. As everyone may or may not know, a lot of our functions are determined by state statute, set forth in Ed Reform of 1994. The one thing that we will be subject to, as in the new charter, are the citizen initiative and referendum parts, that if there's a decision that's unpopular, they can come back and ask us to rethink it.
Okay, great.
Great.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank
Appreciate
you
it.
for the
Thanks for coming
opportunity.
in.
Thank you.
Article 3 is to see if the town will vote to appropriate the sum of $1,082,223 for various capital projects required by the town. And here to discuss this article is Tom O'Connor, Chair of the Capital Planning Committee. Tom?
Thank you, Russ. We had a pretty interesting and challenging year, aside from being historic. We had, just to give you some history, in the past, the general capital request that came through the capital committee was in the area of $4 to $5 million. This year, our initial set of requests came through at over $20 million. So that was a pretty substantial amount of money to be looking at. Through some vetting processes that some of the different boards that we have spoken to, they were able to bring it down, but even bringing it down, we still came up with $13,537,669. So it was a pretty substantial amount of money that was being requested. We ended up reviewing about 33 projects that we were able to vet through and come up with a final budget number that, of course, is always set with the previous year's budget, total town budget of 2%. So we came through, and our total general fund budget for this year was $1,082,233. With that, we were able to fund some pretty, what we thought were pretty necessary and interesting projects that some of the various departments had brought forth to us. With that said, we also had to review a number of other projects that we all felt had merit, but due to restricted funding, we weren't able to even consider. And that's why the number came down substantially. The total capital projects request for this year was $1,765,473, and that included some of the things that Mr. Burek had discussed on the DPW board, having to do with water and sewer fund projects that were, some of which were coming through the general fund and others which were being split. and then other funds which I think are going to be bonded by the DPW. So it was, all in all, it was, I think, a good year.
So what were the major projects that were funded?
The major projects that we funded had to do with the Board of Selectmen, and that was a mandatory closure of the Summers Road landfill. That was a substantial project in the area of $89,100. DPW equipment, which we've seen year after year, had come through, and they're trying to replace and modernize some of their field mowing equipment. And we were able to fund a Toro field mower, which is across the road, which will help them so they don't have to dedicate a truck and a trailer to move that piece of equipment from field to field. We also looked at domestic boiler replacements for the Birchland Park, and that was $26,000. One of our fixed costs pretty much every year is our IT infrastructure maintenance, and that was in the area of $329,000. So that's substantial, and that's pretty much a set fee every year just to maintain our current infrastructure within the IT department.
And does that include town and school?
It does.
Okay.
It includes the town and school and pretty much any other department that they purchase for.
Okay.
The town hall sprinkler system was another one. That was $113,300. And that has to do with the phase 2 of the town hall renovations. That I think most people have visited the town hall. They see what's going on. And the second part of that is the renovations of many of the bathrooms for ADA compliance, and just some of the removal of some of the unwanted materials that have been lingering in our public buildings for years. And that one's going to be $129,427. This year, we funded one police cruiser, and that cost was $40,255. Police tasers was a new request, but one that we all felt was necessary due to the less than lethal response that we think our police need to have. A district school bus for accessible handicapped individuals. That bus alone cost $90,000, but we felt that was a very good project to fund, given that the schools tend to jockey students around, and some of the buses aren't big enough to carry the caretakers of some of the students who are using those vehicles. We also funded the Mountain View bathroom renovation project, which was $67,000. Truck 2 replacement for the DPW was a split, and that was one of the ones I mentioned earlier, with highway. And the highway is a general fund expense, but it's also shared, in this case, with the water department. And then Chestnut and Shaker intersection traffic control equipment. I think most folks who live in town, who travel that area, understand that that's a pretty heavy traffic area, and to any any improvements we can make to that intersection is going to be, I think, greatly appreciated by the residents. And then the last piece was an admin Ford Escape for the highway department. Again, that was the split with the sewer.
So going forward, in your role as chair, I mean, what major projects do you see down the road that the residents must be aware of?
Well, aside from the ones that I mentioned, we still have approximately $11 million of unfunded projects that were requested. So next year and the year after are going to be pretty challenging with regards to funding those projects. Although I think in discussions that we've had with the town treasurer and collector, we were able to look at different bonding options going forward, and I think that's going to be something that will be addressed hopefully in the near future by the town council.
Great.
I would hope.
So Tom, under the new town charter, so what becomes of the capital planning committee?
We're dissolved.
Okay.
The capital planning committee goes away. Our hope, and I think many other residents' hope, is that this committee, as a recommending body, would remain working for the town in some capacity, whether for the town manager or the town council in some advisory role to assist them, since most of the folks that have been on this committee have been on there for years and years and understand the challenges that the town's going to have moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Joining me to explain question 4, which is to appropriate $100,000 and put it into the town stabilization fund, is Kevin Manley, our newest Board of Selectmen member. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And Eric Madison, Chair of the Appropriations Committee.
Thanks for having me. The stabilization fund, we're looking to put $100,000 into the stabilization fund to just have money in the account in the event that there's unforeseen expenses that the town would need to use it for. And the one thing about that that's different from free cash is it would require a 2/3 vote of the legislative body to withdraw money from the fund, so.
Thank you. Article 5 proposes to put $75,000 to raise and appropriate and put into the other post-employment benefits liability fund.
So we're proposing that we put $75,000 into that fund. That fund is gonna be utilized to offset liabilities from employee health care that retire. That money should have been, I guess, being put in there for quite some time, and it's gonna help with, our bond rating and lending institutions looking at us, so that's why we wanted to put that money forward.
Eric?
We have a huge liability that that we started, the Appropriations Committee started addressing a couple years ago. Currently, we have about $1.1 million that's going against nearly a $20 million liability. So although it's a drop in the bucket, $75,000, it is moving forward, and it's in the best financial interest of the town.
Good. So Article 6 proposes to raise and appropriate funds to pay prior year's bills. Eric?
So this is a little bit different than in years past. We had an incident in town where the school department had come forward to the accounting department at the end of the last fiscal year and said, we need to encumber this money. When we encumber money, it means they spent it, they just haven't received the items, or they haven't received and therefore they haven't paid the bill yet. And this is what happens when it crosses fiscal years. So the accounting office encumbered the money, or they thought they encumbered the money, and ultimately there was a glitch in our software that didn't allow that money to be encumbered, and when the bills were paid, they were paid out of the current fiscal year. We can't pay last year's bills out of the current fiscal year. The money that was supposed to pay those bills went to free cash. It was money that the books showed wasn't spent and therefore went to our unobligated funds or free cash. This article proposes to take the money from free cash, where it never should have gone to, put it back into last year's budget to pay those bills, so that this year's budget can be made whole from paying last year's bills. Does that make sense?
It was a wonderful explanation. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. So Article 8 is to see if the town will vote to appropriate the sum of $1,952,747 for the Sewer Enterprise Fund. And here to discuss this article again is Dan Burek, Chairman of the Board of Public Works.
Russ, this is very similar to the water, except it's the Sewer Enterprise Fund. Again, a second year of operation. And again, I'd just like to mention that none of the money from this comes from the general fund for indirect costs. It's all self-sustaining based on revenues that we collect. And this year, in the last 3 years, the town has allowed us $100,000 a year to do I&I, which is inflow and infiltration repairs. And basically what that is we go out and we look for leaks in the sewer pipe. And when we locate it, we have a company come in and they just line it so it patches these holes. And what it is we've seen pictures taken by our staff where you'll find a sewer connection and you'll have a big pipe, and we've seen like 4 fingers that were aimed into the pipe, and each one was like a garden hose, and that's just groundwater leaking in, and all that water that's being taken into the system is going to Bondi's Island to be treated when it shouldn't be in there. So by allowing us this $100,000, we've been saving significant amount of money. And in this year's budget, we were anticipating a little over $250,000 in shortfall. But due to the fact that we've spent this money, we have the money in reserve, and we are going to appropriate the sum of $263,879 from the reserve retained earnings account to pay it. So there will not be an increase in the sewer rates this year. It's going to be maintain that at $2.80 per 100 cubic feet of sewage.
So Dan, I'm going to take the opportunity, so the Board of Public Works is here to discuss the water fund and the sewer fund.
Right.
But just for the residents who might not know, why don't you spend a couple of minutes and also explain the other functions of the Board of Public Works?
We are made up of several departments within the Board of Public Works and the DPW. We've got the highways and parks, and we've got, we manage the utilities, we do the water and the sewer, so, and building facilities.
Building facilities,
We've got a lot on our plate. Each one is totally different than the other one, but with the staff that we hire good staff that we can cross-train so they can do almost anything. If we have a water break, we can send a crew over and fix that. If we have a sewer problem, they can do that. So
Great.
they're all cross-trained pretty much. Some are more specialty. We do have electricians and plumbers, and they will also do snow plowing in the wintertime when we've got the storms, which this year was a great year. We saved the town a lot of money. We
Mother
didn't save
Nature-
it. We didn't
Mother
save it.
Nature
We didn't
saved
save
us
it,
a lot
but
of
yeah,
money.
it saved us a lot of money. But we didn't spend any. It's the first time we've never gone over our budget in many, many years. So it's
Great,
it's good.
thank you. So Article 9 is to see whether the town will vote to reauthorize revolving funds for certain town departments. They are local cable access, LCAT, solid waste disposal, the Council on Aging, and the public library. Eric?
So revolving funds are used when the revenue used to fund certain programs are brought in by way of other than taxation. Oftentimes, it's users' fees. In the case of the LCAP, for example, it's derived from the cable bills that everyone pays. The revolving funds have to be reestablished every year. When we establish them at town meeting last year, that establishment or that authorization is only good for 1 year. So this is kind of a routine reestablishment of existing revolving funds that we use. The revolving funds allow the revenue to come in and then the revenue to go out only for the purposes of those particular programs.
Great, thank you. So Article 10 proposes to create a new revolving fund relating to the health department.
Yeah, this is, actually, this is a terrific program. There's an effort out there to get what people refer to as sharps. And sharps are, for example, needles that people might use to inject their own medicine. A classic example would be the diabetic and the insulin shots that they administer themselves. Those needles right now are going into the rubbish stream. We want to get them for safety reasons and for a variety of other reasons. We want to get them out of the waste stream and into proper disposal. This program will establish a revolving fund that will be funded by users of this program. So if somebody uses needles to administer themselves medications, for example, they can come to the health department, buy a container that safely stores those used needles, and when it's full, come back. When they bought it, the cost of the disposal, the safe disposal of those, is part of the purchase price. They can leave it with the health department, get a new container, and then use that one till it's full. And that's all self-sustaining. The funds are self-sustaining. The startup cost is through a grant. So there's no cost to the taxpayer here, and the Appropriations Committee does recommend the establishment of this new revolving fund.
Great, thanks. Article 11 is to see whether the town will vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $17,500 to fund the Independence Day Parade. Kevin?
That's pretty self-explanatory. We were looking for the selectmen sponsored the bill. Obviously, the parade is a big event in town. And so we were sponsoring the bill to raise and appropriate $17,500 for that parade. It's really basically, if you vote yes, you're voting to put the money forward, and if you don't, then you're voting not to put that money forward for the parade.
Okay, thank you. Article 12 is to see if the town will vote to appropriate from the Community Preservation Fund annual revenues estimated at $250,000. A sum or sums of money is recommended by the Community Preservation Committee for expenses. And I'm going to turn it over to George Kingston, who is chair of the Community Preservation Committee.
Thank you, Russ. Article 12 is our annual housekeeping article. This is the only article that we have on the warrant this time. You may recall that we funded playground equipment at the elementary schools at the fall town meeting, and we did not have any new projects put forward this winter. So all we have is this administrative article. The amount of $250,000 is only an estimate. We never know exactly what the income's going to be until September or October, because this is funded with a 1% surcharge on property taxes, which of course are uncertain until we know exactly what the tax base is going to be. And secondly, it's matched to a certain extent by the state, and that match is determined by the legislature usually late in the summer, depending on state revenues, income, and how much money they've got left over, and how well the Community Preservation Coalition gets to lobby to get them to appropriate funds for this. So what we're doing is, as usual, appropriating 10% for historic reserve, 10% for community housing, 10% for open space, as required under the law, and allowing 5% for administrative expenses. We usually spend a lot less than that, but that's there in case we do need it. Everything else goes into the legally undesignated Community Preservation Fund General Reserve. And then we have to transfer money from our reserves to the general fund to cover the cost of the bonding. And we have two bonds outstanding right now, one for the pool and one for the Brown property, and those are being paid down. So we give that money to the town every year to make sure that those things are covered.
So George, for the residents who are watching, can you maybe discuss how a project comes to fruition being funded through the community preservation funds?
Well, in the past, what we've done is requested that anyone who wants to propose a project, propose it before Christmas, and that way we can meet in January and February and discuss it and decide whether or not to recommend it. Typically what happens is that either residents or some town board, perhaps the Historic Commission, perhaps the school committee, perhaps the Recreation Commission, or the Housing Authority, will come to us with a specific project. We don't generate the projects ourselves. Other people generate them and bring them to us. As long as they fit in with the requirements of law, that is that the money be spent for historic preservation, community housing, open space, or recreation, with certain limits on that, we consider those projects and either recommend or not recommend, depending on what we feel is the merit of the project. We've had to do that in January and February in the past because we needed to meet the timelines for getting on the warrant for town meeting. In the future, going forward, those appropriations from the reserves can be done by town council. And so the Community Preservation Committee will have to be more flexible in its meetings so that when a project comes forward, we can look at the project no matter what time of year it is, and in a timely manner, bring it to the town council for review and or approval. So having said that, it still will take quite some time to review and approve a project before it can actually go forward. Typically, we prefer to take 2 to 3 months to review projects to make sure that the numbers are good, that the project is actually needed, and that it fits in with the long-range budget for the community preservation.
And can you just give us an approximation of how much might be currently in the fund?
I cannot. I would have to go back and talk to the town accountant on that.
Okay.
What I can say is we are expecting in the next few years to see projects coming forward, especially from recreation, for new fields in various places that they are currently evaluating and trying to get some estimates on. So I would expect to be some fairly large projects coming forward within the next year to 3 years.
Great, thank you. And Article 14 is to see if the town will vote to authorize the Board of Selectmen, by virtue of Massachusetts general laws, to take in fee simple for highway purposes the following street as recommended by the Board of Public Works and the Planning Board, Winterberry Lane. Dan?
Right. What happens when a developer comes in and wants to put a subdivision in? They come in and after getting all their approvals, they construct the road, they run the water and sewer underground, and as they build their houses, they connect to the water and sewer. And at the point where the project is done or very near completion, the developer asks that the town then turn it over to the town and make it a public street. And in this case, like many others, the project is near completion. I think it is built out, 6 houses there. And it's ready for acceptance. We've inspected it. It meets town standards, and the planning board and the Board of Public Works both recommend the acceptance of the street as a public street.
And for those residents who might not know, where is Winterberry?
Winterberry is tucked away off of Porter Road. You go down Porter Road to Brookhaven, then you turn left onto Juniper Lane, and at the very end, it's a T intersection where you can go left or right. There's only 6 houses, so there's, I think, 2 houses on the left and
Okay.
4 houses on the right, and it goes nowhere. Just it's very nice subdivision. It's beautiful back there.
Good, thank you. And also, Dan is going to discuss Article 16, which is to see if the town will vote to take in fee simple pursuant to the general laws of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts as a new town way, Waterman Avenue. And this is sponsored by a petition of one of the property owners, but obviously the Board of Public Works will do their due diligence prior to this being acted on.
Right, this is
Dan?
very similar to the prior Winterberry. It was developed many years ago. This is not a new subdivision. This was, Waterman went down, Waterman is off of Westwood Avenue. It went down about 3/4 of the distance it currently is and stopped. And the developer came along and extended it down and built probably another, say, I'm going to estimate 6 houses. And then another developer came along and at the end put another T Street in, and that's Birch Avenue, which is fully developed. Birch Avenue is accepted. The first part of Waterman is accepted. and the developer never came before us to ask it to be changed or accepted by the town as a public way. So the homeowners that live on Pepino Aleno has petitioned as one of the petitioners to have the street accepted as a public way. We have inspected it, and we recommend it for approval.
And so for the residents who might not know, what is the difference between a private way and a public way as it relates to the town's functions?
When a developer first puts a street in, it's a private way, because it hasn't been accepted. They put, like I said earlier, they construct the street, they put the water and sewer under. They usually put their base coat down because they're gonna be digging up to put their laterals in for connecting the water and sewer to the individual houses. But once the town has no responsibility to maintain the street or do anything, except once the first resident moves onto the street, we do plow it so that emergency vehicles can get down there. So it's a street that the people can pass over it, but before it's turned over to us, they must bring it up to the final codes and standards and make sure that the catch basins are cleaned and the hydrants, if there are any there, are operational. So we go through and inspect the whole project, make sure it meets our standards, and then it gets accepted. And then it becomes a public way, and then that distance gets added to our roads that we get Chapter 90 money for.
So there's a benefit,
So there's a
financial
benefit
yeah.
for us
Good.
from the state to get our Chapter 90 money. So every time one goes in, we get more money for it, but we don't get it until it's approved.
Good,
So.
thank you. So Article 15 is to see if the town will vote to approve the direct exchange of 1.10 acres of town-owned property located on 160-170 Summers Road. And it's being sponsored by the Board of Health, and it's recommended by the Board of Selectmen. Kevin, do you want to address this article?
Yeah, this article is actually a one-for-one even swap of property, which real value of the property is equivalent on both sides. There's, right now, 2 pieces of town property, and in the middle of those is a slice of private property that actually extends into where the old landfill was, behind the fire station. The exchange will allow the town to have one contiguous piece of property that goes across, and it actually makes the homeowner whole, so their deeded value in their deeded property is the same acreage that they had previously had. It was looked into, it's by DPW, it's in the best interest of the town because there's some issues obviously with the landfill, and we want to make sure that we didn't have to take property from a homeowner or buy property, so there was an agreement between the parties that if it was approved at the town meeting, we could actually just swap those pieces and it would work out even for everybody.
And so why is it sponsored by the Board of Health?
Well, because I guess traditionally in most municipalities, the waste landfills are under the Board of Health, not traditionally under the DPW, so the Board of Health has taken over part of that as there's some capping that has to be done there and some coverage of the landfill that was there prior. DPW has done the job there for a number of years because at the time we didn't have a Board of Health. So now that we've established a Board of Health, we're looking to put that piece underneath the Board of Health direction. The DPW will take care of what's at the transfer station, and the Board of Health will then take care of all the other issues that we had with the previous landfill.
And there's no cost associated with this transfer of property?
No, there's no cost. It's an even swap. The property amounts are exactly even. The assessed value of those properties is exactly even, so it's just basically a trade.
Okay, great. So that ends our presentation of the preview of the annual town meeting, which again is scheduled for Monday evening, May 16th, 2016, at 7 p.m. at East Long Meadow High School in the auditorium. As I indicated in my opening, that potentially this could be the very last town meeting in the history of the town of East Long Meadow. I urge you to attend, I urge you to participate, and Come July 1, with the introduction of the new form of government, I ask that you be vigilant, ask questions, be concerned, and be involved in your new town government. This is Russell Denver. Thank you very much.